Hello everybody and welcome to another Django and React tutorial video. In part 13 of this series, what we're going to be doing is actually working with the Spotify API. Now I want to give a warning before we dive into anything. This is fairly complicated. In fact, this is pretty advanced. This took me a really long time to figure out before filming this video. And I just want to make sure that I'm not giving you the impression that this is easy or that I came up with this, within the duration of the video. This is pre-coded. This took me a long time to figure out. If you ever want to use these kind of APIs, typically you have to do a lot of reading and a lot of research on their websites, a lot of trial and error and just kind of messing around and trying to figure things out, which is exactly what I did before this video. So I will leave links to most of the resources that I used to discover this or figure this out in the description in case you're interested. But of course, I'm going to try my best to explain how everything works. So anyways, let me talk about what we actually need to do here and what kind of the goal of this video is. So we want to be able to control a user's music. We want to be able to pause it, fast forward the song, rewind the song, whatever. We want control over their music. Now this requires two things from Spotify. First, we need to register an application with Spotify. So our actual website, we can refer to that as an application. We need to register that with Spotify and tell them, hey, this is our app. We're using user data, whatever. We just need to tell them that we have some application that's using their API. Then what we need to do is every single user that's using our website and whose music we're going to control, we need to give them to grant us permission to use and access their Spotify information. So they need to give our application explicit permission. So the basic kind of flow of things here is going to be we authenticate our application with Spotify. Then the user authenticates our application. So it says, hey, your application has access to my information. It can control the music, so on and so forth. And then using that authentication or using what we're going to call tokens, and I'll talk about what those are in a second, we'll actually be able to send requests to the Spotify API that will in turn control the user's music. So that's kind of the flow, and this diagram in front of me somewhat describes what's actually going to happen. Now I'm going to try to kind of break this down and walk through it, but I just want to talk to you about what we're doing, because if I don't, it's just going to seem really confusing if we go through all the steps without kind of tying them all together and seeing the big picture. So we have our application on the left, Spotify account services or service, which we're just going to call the Spotify API, and then we have our user. So we're going to start by creating some application with Spotify. That will be denoted by application. Our application is going to have a client ID. It's also going to have a client secret. It's pretty much the identifier for our application. So we start at the very first step by requesting authorization to access data. So we do that with Spotify. We're pretty much saying, hey, Spotify, can our application access Spotify information? It's going to tell us yes, or it's going to tell us no, depending on if the information we send it is correct. We need to send it this information. So the client ID, the response type, the redirect URI, the state, and the scope. Now, what's going to happen here is this is going to display scope and prompt to the user to log in. Now, let me just break this down because this is not too descriptive. So a scope is pretty much what you have access to, what information you want to have access to. So do you want the user's email? Do you want their library? Do you want their playlist? Whatever, that's what you're putting in the scope. And well, based on what scope you send to Spotify, Spotify will show a different prompt to the user to allow your application access to that information. So imagine you go on some website and you log in with Facebook, and then all of a sudden it says, Facebook wants to access, this third-party application wants to access this information. Do you give it permission? And then this is like a Facebook website that's popping up, right? You press, yes, I grant permission. Then it redirects back to your other application. So that's where the redirect URI comes in. After this prompt appears on the screen, the user will log into their Spotify account, and then they will press, yes, I authorize this application, which is our application, to have access to this specific information. Then it will redirect us with the redirect URI back to our own website. So at that point in time, we go back to our application, and now the user's given us authorization to use their information. So what's actually going to happen is we're going to be sent a code. And we use this code to actually request what's known as a token. Now, this token is what we're going to use whenever we send a request to Spotify to say, hey, we have access to this user's information because we have this special token. And if that special token matches what Spotify's stored on their end, then it will allow us to actually get information. So we're just requesting some kind of token. Now, I don't know why they make it this confusing, but essentially it sends us some code. We use that code to request a token, and then we use that token to actually send requests. So we say here, request access and refresh tokens. So we send our client ID, we send our client secret, and we send this code that was sent to us from the user authorizing our application. Then what's going to happen is this returns to us the access and refresh tokens. Now, what these tokens are the following. The access token is what we use to access information. The refresh token is what we use to, ask for another token. So our access token expires after 1 hour. So after every hour, we need to refresh this token. So we have to send not the access token now, but the refresh token to Spotify. And then it says, okay, yep, that was a valid refresh token. And it sends us back a new access token that is valid. So that's the idea there. And then it tells us when this access token expires. But from my experience, it always expires after 1 hour. Anyways, once we now have access to access and refresh token, we are able to send requests to the Spotify API and control the user's music. So that's kind of the flow. I know this is confusing. We'll go through it step by step, but I just wanted to break it down before we start to make sure everyone's on the same page and they know what we're about to do in this probably hour or so long tutorial. So we're going to dive in, we're going to start coding, but first a quick word from our sponsor, Algo Expert. So Algo Expert is the best platform to use to prepare for your software engineering coding interviews. As you guys know, I work at Algo Expert and I'm continually adding new questions to the platform. If you guys are looking to ace your coding interviews, check out Algo Expert from the link in the description and use the discount code TechWithTim for a discount on the platform. All right, so let's continue. I'm going to get out of this now, and I'm actually going to go to this website, which is the developer.spotify.com. So kind of like the developer website for Spotify. Now I'll leave a link to this in the description, but go to this site. And before you go here, you actually need to create a Spotify account. So it doesn't matter if this is a premium account or a free account or whatever, it doesn't matter. All of this will work. Once you come to this website and you have the account, log into that account. It's going to bring you to something that looks like this. Now, you guys probably aren't going to see any applications here. These are my different Spotify applications. And what we're going to do is create an app. Now, this app is going to represent our website. So this is the application that I was just talking about in this diagram right here. So this blue application is this app that we're making right now. So call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call this tutorial 1, just because I already have one named tutorial. And then I think a description is required, so I'll just do tutorial 1. All right, I'll check the boxes, press create. Okay, so now it's going to show us a client ID and a client secret. Now, if we go back to this diagram here, the first thing we send is the client ID. So we need to keep track of both the client ID and the client secret, but we don't want this information to be public. Like, we don't want to store this on the front end. We don't want anyone to see this other than our application. Specifically, this client secret, we don't want anyone to see what this is. So keep that in mind. I'm showing you mine just for the purpose of the tutorial, but don't share this with anyone else. Okay, so now that we have this page open, let's leave it open because we're going to need to work on this a few times. But now we're going to go to the code and then start working on something else. So the first thing that I actually want to do is I want to create a new application inside of my Django project that's going to handle all of the stuff specific to Spotify. So we're just going to make a new app. We're going to say Python manage.py and then start app like that. And then we'll call this Spotify for simplicity. All right, so let's make a new Spotify app. You can see one's going to show up right here. Now, the first thing we'll do inside of this application is we'll just create a few files that we need. So we'll make our urls.py file, urls.py like that. We'll also make another file inside of here, and we're going to call this credentials. Or, yeah, we'll call it credentials. That's fine. So credentials.py. Now, inside of credentials.py, this is where we are going to store our Spotify credentials. So our client ID, our client secret, and also the redirect URI or the redirect URL, whatever you want to call it. So the first thing I'm going to do inside of here is define some variables. I'm going to say client ID is equal to, I'm going to put a string. I'm going to go to the website where the client ID is. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it in there. All right, so client ID. Then I'm going to say in all capitals again, client underscore secret like that is equal to a string. Then I'm going to go take my client secret. So let's grab it right here, copy it and paste it in. Lastly, I'm going to make my redirect underscore URI. And this is just going to be equal to an empty string for right now. We will change this later. Now, I just want to note here that although I'm storing this information in a file, typically the preferred way to do this is through environment variables. If you know how to use environment variables, feel free to use them, but I'm not going to use them for this tutorial just because it adds a layer of complexity that we really don't need for this this purpose. Anyways, let's continue. I'm going to close the credentials.py file. I can close the urls.py file. And now what I want to do is start setting up this authentication flow. So I need some endpoints, or I need some functions or something that can send requests to Spotify to authenticate our application as well as to authenticate a user. So I'm going to go inside of my views.py file inside of the Spotify application that we just created. And I'm going to start by creating the first view, which is going to be the view that can authenticate our application or request access, right? So if we go back and look at that diagram, we're going to be referring to this quite a bit. The first thing here, this is what we need to do: request authorization to access data using the client ID, the redirect URI, and the scope and all of that. So what I'm going to do is just remove this comment. I'm going to import a few things. I'm going to say from .credentials, so that file we just wrote, import, and then I'm going to import everything. So redirect URI, I want the client secret, and I also want the client ID like that. Next, I'm going to say from, I guess this is REST_framework, import, and sorry, this is REST framework.views, import API view. Then I'm going to make a class. I'm going to say class auth URL, and this will inherit from API view. And then I'm going to define a get method. This is going to take self and request and an optional format. So format equals none. And inside of here, we're going to start writing out the request that we need to send to the Spotify API. So actually, let's import one more thing up here. I'm going to say from the request module in Python, which I think is by default installed. Maybe it's not. Anyways, just do yourself a favor because I don't know if request is a default module in Python, and you can install it with pip. So pip install requests. I assume if you've made it this far, you know how to use pip. But yeah, install the request module, although I think it by default comes installed. Anyways, from requests, we're going to import request with a capital R. Then we're going to import post. This is just going to make it easier for us to actually send a request. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is inside of this get function, I'm going to say scopes equals, and I'm going to start writing out a long scope. In fact, actually, let me just copy and paste it in because it's not really worth me writing it out. You guys can pause and copy it. But again, what the scope is what information we want to access. So we want the user read playback state, the user modify playback state, and the user read currently playing. These are the things that we want because this is what we actually want to be able to do with our application. Now, if you wanted to do more, you would have to add all those other specific scopes. Now, if you're wondering where you find these scopes, this is from the Spotify developer website, so from the documentation. I actually can't remember exactly where I found all these scopes, but you would just have to look for those on the Spotify website. Anyways, these are the scopes that we need for this application. So I'm going to say scopes like that. Next, I'm going to say URL is equal to request. This should be a uppercase actually as the first one. So we'll say request. And then the type of request is going to be a get request. And we're going to send this to https:// and this is going to be accounts.spotify.com/authorize like that. This is the first URL that we need to hit. And this is the specific one that we hit when we're requesting authorization. So let's do that. Then we're going to say params is equal to, again, this stands for parameters, and we're going to pass in all of the required information. So if we go back here, we need the client ID, response type, redirect URI, and state and scope. Now we actually don't need state. That is a, optional parameter to pass in here. And I'm not really going to talk about exactly what it does, but we can just omit it for now. So we're going to say scope is equal to scopes. I guess we could have put this as scope as well. It doesn't matter. We're going to say response underscore type, and we want this to be equal to the string code. The reason for this is we are requesting that we get sent a code back that will allow us to authenticate a user. So we're taking the code. Next, we're going to say redirect underscore and then URI like that. And this is going to be equal to the redirect URI variable that we imported up above. So redirect URI. And if we want to change the redirect URI, we'll go to the credentials file to do that. Next, we are going to say that the client underscore ID is equal to the client ID like that. Remove the comma. And then here we'll say dot prepare and then dot URL. Now what this is going to do is just generate a URL for us. The output of this will be a string. And the reason why I'm not actually sending the request right now is because what I want to do is I want to have the front end get this request. So I want the front end to get this URL here and then send it from there. You'll see why, but essentially what this view right here is going to do, or what this API endpoint is going to do for us, is just return a URL that we can go to authenticate our Spotify application. So we're preparing the URL, we have our scopes, and then finally we're going to return from here a response, and we're going to say URL. Sorry, this should be inside of curly braces like that. I'm going to say URL colon URL. And then status is equal to status, and we need to import status. So I think this is from, where do I get status? From REST framework. We already have that. Okay, so from REST framework like that, import status. Okay, now we're going to say status.http underscore 200 underscore okay. All right, and we also need to import response. My bad. So we're going to say import status and import response. I think that's the right import, but let me just make sure. Nope, of course that's the wrong import. We're gonna say from, nope, come on, what's going on here with my code? From REST framework dot, and I guess this is response, import response, and this should be a lowercase. Okay, so from REST framework dot response, import response. Nice. So now what we're doing is we've just set up an API endpoint that will return to us a URL. And this URL we will use to authenticate our application. You'll see why we've done this in a second, but it's just required that we do it this way. Now we're going to go to urls.py and we're going to set up a URL for this auth URL view. So let's just go to another urls.py file. Not this one, actually. Let's go to front end and let's just copy the existing content so we get these imports in here already. Now I'll go over to my other URLs inside of Spotify, paste that inside, remove that, remove all this, and we'll say path. This is going to be /get auth URL. You could call this whatever you want, but we'll just go with get auth URL. And then we need to import. So we'll say from .views import auth URL like that. Then here, we're going to say auth URL dot as underscore view. Now, actually, I just realized I have this slash here. We can remove that, but that's good. That's all set up. Now what I need to do is add a URL path for this Spotify app from my main application URL. So let's go to music controller urls.py. Here, you can see that we're including the front end URLs. We also want to include the Spotify URL. So we're going to say now, if you go to Spotify /, we're going to include Spotify.urls. There we go. So now we can actually hit and reach that URL endpoint. Okay, great. So now we have the endpoint that actually gives us a URL. Now we're not done yet. Of course, there's a lot more that we need to do. The next thing that we need to do is set up a redirect URI. This is also oftentimes referred to as a callback. So essentially, after we send the request to this URL right here, we need a callback or some URL that this information gets returned to. So again, let's go back to this diagram and make sure we understand. So we're sending this request. So let's say we're at this point right here. Then the user logs in, they authorize their access. Then what's going to happen is we get returned code and state. So what we need is some endpoint or some, I guess, view or function or whatever you want to call it that can take in this code and do something with it. So after we get the authorization access, we then need to send another request and get the access and refresh token. So that's what our callback needs to do. So when we pass the redirect URL, after this is done, it's going to send this information to the redirect URL or URI. Anyways, let's code out this function. So I'm not going to make this an API view, although we could make it an API view, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say define Spotify underscore callback like this. And this is going to be equal to request. And sorry, it's going to have request as a parameter. And it's going to say format equals none. Then inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the pieces of information from this request that I want. So the first thing that I want is the code. this code is how we're actually going to authenticate our user, or access, the refresh token and the access token. So we're going to say code is equal to request.get, and then we want code like that. Then we are going to say error is equal to request.get, and error. Now we're actually not going to do anything with this error, but I just wanted to show you how we can get this in case you want to see what the actual error message is. If for some reason there is an error, then we will get a response that does have an error tag in it, or error information. And in that case, we can read this error and maybe display it to the user and see what's actually going wrong. Anyways, once we get this information, now what we're going to do is send a request back to the Spotify account service that says, hey, give me the access token and give me the refresh token. So we're going to say response is equal to, and we're going to use post, which I imported up here from requests. And inside of here, we're going to post to https:// and then accounts.spotify.com/API/token. Again, to find this URL, you would just have to look at the Spotify documentation. So we're going to say data, and inside of here, we're going to pass all the data that we need. So we're going to pass the client ID, the client secret, the grant type, the code, and the redirect URI. So inside of here, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to say grant_type, and this is going to be equal to authorization_code, like that, because that's what we want. Then we're going to say code is equal to, the variable code that we had above. Then we're going to say that the redirect URI inside of a string _URI is equal to the redirect URI. We're going to send now the client ID and the client secret as well. So client ID, and finally client_secret, client_secret. All right, then we're going to get the JSON from this. So, that needs to be in lower cases, but by calling this post method right here, we will actually automatically send the request, and then we will get the response, and we'll convert that into JSON. So that's different from here because we're not actually sending the request in this API. We're simply generating a URL so that we can then send the request to that URL. Anyways, you'll see when we use this, it will start making sense, but let's continue. So now Spotify callback. After we do this, what we want to do is we want to look at this response, and we want to get the access token and the refresh token and all the other information. So we're going to say access_token is equal to response, and then we're just going to get, like this, the access_token. Then we're going to say the token_type is equal to response.get and token_type. And you get the idea. We're going to continue to do this for everything else. So refresh_token is equal to response.get, and then refresh_token. What else do we need? We want the expires in. So we're going to say expires_in is equal to response.get expires_in. Okay, that's great. And then finally, we'll get the error. So we'll say error is equal to response.get. And then inside of here, we will say error. All right, so now we've gotten the information that we want. Now the question is, what do we do with this now? So this is our callback. So after we send the request to this URL, it will return the information to this function right here. Inside of this function, we then send a request using the code to get access to the access token, the refresh token, all the other information that we want. So now what we actually need to do is we need to store this token. Now, keep in mind that we need to do this for multiple users, right? Every single time a user creates a new room, we need them to authenticate their Spotify, and hence we need to store multiple tokens for each user that's on our website. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a database that can actually store all of these tokens. And we're going to associate the user's session key or their session ID with their access token. Now, keep in mind that we only need the access token for people that are hosts of the room. So if we can do that, if we can store all of the host access tokens and refresh tokens, we're good. We can use them whenever we want. And then, of course, if they have a new session, we'll have to get a new access token, refresh token, and all of that. Anyways, the point of me saying this is that now we need to make a model. So we're going to go to models.py, and just like we've done previously, we're going to make a model that can store tokens. So we're going to say class. We're going to call this Spotify token, like that. And we're going to take as the inheritance models dot model. Now inside of here, we're going to say the user is going to be equal to models dot char field like that. And we'll say the max underscore length is equal to 50 and unique is equal to true. Next, we'll say created underscore at is equal to models dot date time field. And we'll say auto add underscore it's auto now underscore add equals true like that. And then we will do the refresh token. So we'll say refresh underscore token is equal to models dot char field. Max length equals 150 characters. I don't think it's that long, but just in case we got a really long one, let's do that. I'm going to copy this one more time for the access token. So that, and then we want to store the expires underscore in. So that will be equal to models dot date time field. And then we'll say the token underscore type is equal to the models dot char field with the max underscore length equal to 50. All right, so that's the information that we want to store in this model. But now, since we made a change to our model, we need to actually perform a migration. So this is actually a good thing to show. So let me just quit my web app now. Let's go over here. And I'm going to just clear the screen so it's easier. I'm going to say Python manage.py and then make migrations like that. So again, whenever we make changes to our database or we add a new model, we need to make migrations. So we say make migrations. We should see migrations for API. Okay, alter field. Okay, that's not exactly what I wanted to do. All right, let's try Python manage.py migrate like that and see what that one does. So I realized I made a very small mistake here. When we added the Spotify app, we forgot to add it to installed apps. So when I just did this migration, I guess I had made some minor change. That's why something actually happened, but it wasn't adding our new model. And I was like, what's going on? The reason why it wasn't doing that is because I didn't add this app to our installed apps. So let's go to music controller settings and let's add this in. So what we need to do is just say Spotify.apps.spotify and then config like that. Now, once we add this to the installed apps, if we run Python manage.py make migrations, we should see that there we go, create model Spotify token. Then after we make the migrations, we'll migrate, and there we go. So it performed the migrations and all was good. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. You guys followed with that small mistake, but now let's continue. So now that we have this model, what I want to do is as soon as I get access to this information, I want to store it in the database. So I want to store it in this Spotify token model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the user. Let me go back to models here. I'm going to use user right here. I'm going to store their session key, right? Just like we've done for the rooms, I'm going to have user storing the session key. So that way we can figure out which user is associated with each set of tokens. Okay, awesome. So let's go back to views. And now we want to save these tokens. So what I'm going to do, because things are going to start to get a little bit messy here if we do everything in one file, is I'm going to make a new file inside of Spotify here. And I'm going to call this util.py, standing for utilities, right? So inside of here, we're going to define a function. And what this function is going to do is save our token. So it's either going to save it in a brand new model, or it's going to update an existing model with new tokens. So I'm just going to call this define update underscore or underscore create underscore user underscore tokens. And again, the point of this is just to update or create user tokens and store them in the database. So the first thing I need is my session underscore key or my session ID, whatever. I'll just call it session ID, but I think it's probably more appropriate as session key. Then we'll say we want the access token that we would need to save. We need the token underscore type. Pretty much everything that we had on the model, we're going to have to take in here. Then we also need expires underscore in. And finally, we need our refresh token. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say tokens is equal to, and we're going to look to see if the existing user has any currently existing tokens. So this leads me to another function that we're going to write, which is called define get underscore user underscore tokens. And inside of here, we're just going to take the session underscore ID. Now we're going to import our model from above. So we're going to say from .models import Spotify token like that. And then we were going to say user underscore tokens is equal to Spotify token dot objects dot filter, and then user is equal to session ID. So just checking if we actually have any tokens associated with the specific user. Then we're going to say if user underscore tokens dot exists. So if we do actually have any tokens here, we'll return user tokens at index 0 because we know we'll only ever have one set of tokens for an existing user. Otherwise, we'll return none. So return none like that. Great. So now we can use this function. So we'll say tokens equals get user tokens. Session ID is what we'll pass here. And then we'll say expires in is equal to, and I need to set something here. So I kind of got ahead of myself. I should have explained what's going on here. But when we actually get the request back with these tokens, so it's going to send us the access token, the token type, all this information, right? Expires in is actually going to be a numeric value. In fact, it's going to be equal to 3600. Now, this is telling us that your token is going to expire in 3600 seconds, which is 1 hour. So what we need to do is convert this into a timestamp, because sure, 3600 is useful to us, but I don't want to just store 3600, right? I want to store the time at which our token actually expires. So I'm going to get the current time and then add an hour to it and store that in the database. So that way it's really easy for me to check if the token's expired. I don't need to do any other math. I'm just storing the correct value in the database. So to do this, we need to actually import something. We're going to say from Django.utils import, and it's called time zone like this. Now for expires in, what I'm going to do is say timezone.now. This will give us the current time that is related to the current time zone that we're in. So we'll say timezone.now plus time delta, and I need to import time delta. This is from date time. So we're going to say from date time import time delta like that. We're going to say seconds equals, and then 3600. Not 2600. Sorry, I shouldn't put 3600 here. I should put expires underscore in. Okay, so this, since we know it's a numeric value and it's giving us the amount of seconds, we say, okay, let's convert this number of seconds into a time delta. This just allows us to add it to an actual timestamp. Then we'll add it to timezone.now, and then we'll use that and store that in the database. Okay. Great. So next we're going to say if tokens. So if we actually do have tokens associated with the current user, then rather than creating new tokens, we're just going to update the existing one. So we'll say tokens.access token is equal to, I guess this will be access token. Then we will say tokens.refresh token is equal to the refresh token. Tokens.expires underscore in is equal to expires in. Tokens dot, what's the last one here? Token underscore type equals token type. Great. Then we're going to save this. So we're going to say tokens dot save, and we need to add the update field. So we'll say update underscore fields is equal to, and we'll update the access token field. We'll update the refresh underscore token field. We'll update the expires underscore in field, and finally the token type, although the token type should stay the same like when we're updating this. Then we will say else, and under here, rather than updating all this information, we'll just create new tokens. So we'll say tokens is equal to Spotify token like that. And then we'll say user is equal to the session ID. We'll say the access token is equal to the access token. We'll say the refresh token is equal to the refresh token. We'll say the token type is equal to the token type. And finally, we'll say expires in equals expires in. Great. Then we'll say tokens.save. And there we go. We will have created that in the database. Now, the reason I'm going through this quickly is just because I've already shown almost all of this syntax before in previous videos. So if for some reason this is really confusing, maybe consult some of the other videos. Anyways, all we're doing again is just updating or creating a new token instance in the database. Awesome. So now that we have this util.py file done, let's actually use this. So let's go to our views.py from inside of Spotify, and let's import these functions. So let's say from .util import, and then we want to import, update, or create user tokens. Great. So now we will actually use that. So let's go down into our Spotify callback, and let's call update or create user tokens. Now let's pass the information we need. The first piece of information we need is actually the session key or the session ID, whatever you want to call it. So to get that piece of information, I'm going to copy in a code snippet we've seen many times now, and that is this. So we're going to say if not request request.session.exists, and then request.session.session key created. So just make sure that we do actually have a session key, because if we don't, then this is going to cause an error. Anyways, then we will pass the request.session.session key as the first argument. And then we need to look at the other order. Oh, it's telling us right here, access token, token type, expires in, refresh token. So access token, the token type like that, the expires in, and finally the refresh token. All right, so let's use that. And then we're almost done. We're at the very end of this function. What we want to do is return the redirect, and we're going to redirect to our front end colon. Now, I'll show you how this works in a second, but we need to import the redirect function. So let's go up here, and then I believe this is from Django.shortcuts. We're going to import redirect. I don't think we've used this before, but this is just how we redirect to a different web page. So I know this is a lot to comprehend at once, but this is our Spotify callback. So let's go back to this diagram here. It's going to pass the code to this function that we just wrote. Then what we're doing inside of this function is we're doing this step. So step number 2, we're sending the client ID, the secret, the grant type, the code, and the URI, and requesting the access token and the refresh tokens. Then it's returning those tokens to us. We're storing those tokens in the database. And then what we need to do after this step is we need to return back to our original application. So the flow is from our front end, we're going to call this API endpoint. We are then going to take the URL that's returned to us, and we're going to redirect to that page. Then from there, that URL, once the user is done authorizing us, will redirect to this function right here. Then from this function, we'll send the request for the tokens, store the tokens, and then redirect back to our original application. So that's why I'm redirecting to front end colon. Now, there's a lot more steps that we need to do here. But anyways, hopefully that's a good summary of what we've done so far. So let's go to urls.py now inside of Spotify, and let's set up a path for that thing that we just created. So let's import the Spotify callback. We also could call this redirect, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to say path. I'm going to call this redirect, and then I'm going to say that this is just going to hit this function, which is Spotify callback. Great. So I don't think, I think I did show you guys how this worked at the beginning of the tutorial series. Anyways, this is just a different type of view, right? So we're just redirecting to a different page from this view. Now notice I'm doing front end colon. So the way this works is that if we want to redirect to a different app, right? Because right now I'm inside of the Spotify application. If I want to redirect to a page inside of the front end application, which is what I want to do, I put the name of the application, colon, and then the page that I want to go to. So if I wanted to go to the room page, I would go room like that. But all I actually want to do here is just redirect back to the home page, because we've already set it up so that the home page will redirect us to the correct page if we're already in a room, right? So if I just go to the front end home page, then I know I'm going to end up going to the right place. Anyways, to make this work, what you need to do is go inside of the urls.py file for your front end. So go inside of front end to urls.py, and you need to add a variable up here called app_name and set it equal to the front end. So, or you can set it equal to whatever you want, but front end is the correct name. The reason we're doing this is because Django needs to know that this urls.py file belongs to the front end app. It can determine that because of the folder it's in, but this is just something that's required to put inside of here so that that method I just showed you actually works. We also need to go inside of path. We need to name our path. So I'm going to say name is equal to and just an empty string. The reason for this is because right now we don't actually have a way of identifying all of these paths. Sure, we can look at, the name of the actual path, but we need to give it a formal name so that when we call the redirect function, we know which path we should actually go to. In theory, I could name this hello, and then if I redirected to front end colon hello, it would bring me to the empty string path. So anyways, let's just leave it empty string so that makes sense. But now our redirect should actually work. Okay, so now that we have that, let's see what we need to do next. Okay, so I was going to jump over to the front end, but I realized that it probably makes more sense to just do all the back end stuff first and then go over there. So we need to write a few more functions here that have some specific purpose. The first one is to check if a user is currently authenticated. So obviously we don't want to keep asking the user to authenticate if they're already authenticated. So we need something that can tell us, well, if they're authenticated. So let's go to util.py. And the nice thing is that now that we have these tokens stored in a database, we can just check if the current session ID, so representing the user, is in the database and if the token is expired or not. If the token's not expired, they're authenticated. If it is expired, we need to refresh it. So let's write a function. I'm going to call this one is Spotify underscore authenticated, like that. And we're going to take the session ID. Now, maybe we just call it is authenticated, but let's just be more specific and put Spotify there. And inside of here, what I'm going to do is check if the current session ID, so the user is authenticated. So we'll say tokens equals, and then get underscore user underscore tokens, that function that we wrote up here. We'll pass the session underscore ID, and then we'll just do a quick if statement and say if tokens. So if tokens, then what we're going to do is say date is equal to tokens dot expires in. In fact, maybe we'll call this expiry because that probably makes a bit more sense. So we'll say expiry like that, and then if expiry, because remember, this is a date time object, is less than or equal to the current time zone dot now. We already imported this from above. Then what we need to do is refresh this token. So we're pretty much saying if the current expiry has passed, right? If the current time has passed the expiry, let's refresh this token. Then otherwise, so let's just fill this if statement here. Actually, I don't even need the else. I can just say return false like that, because if we don't have any tokens, then we are not authenticated. If we didn't get something from the database, we are not authenticated, so we return false. And then here we need to actually refresh the token. So I'm going to write another function now. I'm going to say define renew, or we call it refresh underscore Spotify underscore token. Okay, so inside of here, we're going to send the request that we need to use to actually refresh our token. Unfortunately, they don't have this request in that nice little drawing. Otherwise, I would walk you through why I've kind of picked the stuff that I have. But just trust me, this is how you actually refresh it. And anyways, it's not too difficult. We've kind of done this already. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say tokens is equal to, and then get user token session ID. Maybe if we want to save some time here, we could just pass the token. So let's actually just say tokens like that. And here inside of this if statement, we'll call refresh underscore Spotify token, and we'll just pass it the tokens. Now, when I'm saying tokens, I'm really just talking about that model object, right? That is storing the tokens. That's what's being returned here. I'm just calling it tokens because it does have multiple tokens in it. Anyways, we have tokens. So we're going to say that the refresh token, which is the one we really need here, is equal to tokens dot refresh token. Again, remember, this is just the model. So we have refresh token, access token, expiry token, so on and so forth. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say response is equal to post. And here we're going to post to https://accounts.spotify.com/API/token. This is the same one that we've used previously. And then we're going to say data is equal to, we're going to send some information. Now, what we need to send here is the following. So the grant type is going to be equal to our refresh token. So this is saying, what do we want? What do we want? We want a refresh token. Or what are we sending? Sorry, we're sending the refresh token, my bad. And if we looked at the other grant type, where was the other grant type? Is it in this file or is it in views? Let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so authorization code, right? So we're pretty much telling it what to expect. Here we're saying, yeah, we're sending an authorization code. And here we're saying we are sending a refresh token. So my bad. Okay, and then we're going to say the actual refresh token is equal to the refresh token. Then we want to send the client ID. So we'll say the client underscore ID is equal to the client ID, which I think I have imported. No, I don't have it imported. So let's import that from above. So from dot credentials, import client underscore ID, client underscore secret, like that. Okay, so we'll send the client ID. And then finally, we'll send the client underscore secret. So client secret, like that. Great. So now we have that information. Post, okay, that's fine. Undefined variable. Oh, I guess I didn't import post. Sorry, guys. Let's go to the top and import post. So let's say from requests, import post. Okay, so post should be good now. Awesome. We'll just convert this into JSON because that will actually give us the response. And then we'll say the new access token is equal to the response dot get. And we're going to get the access underscore token. So again, this is returning to us a new access token and a new refresh token that we can use for our API. Okay, so there we go. Next, we'll say the token underscore type is equal to response.get the token type. This may seem not important, or that we don't have to do this because the token type really should stay the same all the time. But in case Spotify decides to change something in the future, it just makes sense to do this. And then we'll say expires in is equal to response dot get, and we will get the expires hyphen in. And then lastly, we'll say the refresh underscore token is equal to the response dot get refresh token. Okay, great. So now we have all that information. And lastly, we will call our update or create user tokens. And inside of here, we'll just pass everything. So we'll start. So here, this is the issue. This is where I need my session ID, because I need to pass my session ID to my update or create user token. So anyways, we'll pass session ID. We'll change inside of here to be session ID. And then for our refresh token, this will have to be equal to get user tokens. We're going to have to pass the session ID dot and then refresh token. And then sorry, up here, we're going to have to change tokens to be session ID. Okay, so hopefully you guys see the changes there. We're just changing the parameter, and that required a few other small changes. Anyways, we're going to say update or create user token. We're going to pass the session ID. We're going to pass the new access token, the token type, the expires in, and the new refresh token. Come on, why is refresh token not showing up? Did I spell something wrong? Refresh token. Okay, I think that is good. All right. Oh, sorry. This should be a string. My bad, guys. String needs to go inside of this get. Okay, so that's actually it for refreshing the Spotify token. So now what we'll do is, well, we've already had this here. After we refresh the Spotify token, we will return true. So this is just checking. So, okay, do we have a token? If we don't, return false because we're not authenticated. If we have a token, but it's expired, then we are authenticated. We just need to refresh the token. So let's do that. And then after we do that, we're all good. We can return true. Now, of course, if this isn't true, that just means that we have a non-expired refresh token. So we just return true. Awesome. So now one last thing that we need to do here, we need to set up a view that can actually tell us whether or not we are authenticated. So this util, right, is returning true or false. This is Python code, but we need to return some JSON that our front end can actually understand. So let's go to views.py and let's make one more function here. And in fact, we can make this a class. We'll say class is authenticated like that. This will inherit from the API view, and we'll define a get method. So define get self request in optional format equal to none. Now inside of here, what we're going to do is we're just going to call this util function, which is Spotify authenticated, and we'll just return some JSON response to whoever's sending this to us, telling us whether you're authenticated or not. Okay, so we're going to say is underscore authenticated is equal to, and then we need to import from up here is Spotify authenticated. So we'll call the is underscore Spotify authenticated. We'll pass in here the the self dot request dot session key. That's all we need for that. And then what we can do is simply return a response. So we'll say return response. Inside of here, we will say, I guess, status is equal to, and then is underscore authenticated. And then we'll say the status is equal to status.http underscore 200 underscore OK. All right, so pretty straightforward. But this is just going to be an endpoint that we can hit that will tell us whether or not we are authenticated. So let's go to urls.py and let's set up the actual endpoint for this. So let's import this. We'll say is authenticated. And then we want to return a path. And we'll just say is hyphen authenticated. And we'll say is authenticated.as view. All right. So at this point in time, the backend is done. There's a few minor things we're going to do in the future, but that's fine. We'll continue moving on for right now. And I understand this video is getting long. If you guys are here, congratulations. Hopefully everything's making sense. And again, code link in the description in case I'm going too fast for you. So let's go to components now inside of our front end app. We're going to go to room.js. So the idea here is that as soon as we get into a room, if we are the host of this room, then what we need to do is immediately authenticate our Spotify, right? Because we need a way to actually control the music. So if the user is a host and the user enters this room, then we need to check if they have authenticated with Spotify. If they have not, we need to actually authenticate them, right? So we need to show them that web page that has the prompt. and then they need to, give us the authorization or whatever it is. We need to take the token, store them in the database, and then all will be good. But this needs to be handled from the front end, at least a part of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a variable to the state. I'm just going to call this Spotify Authenticated, and this will be equal to false. Then I'm going to make a method. I'm going to call this Authenticate Spotify. So Authenticate Spotify like that. And inside of here, we're going to send a request to our backend, and we're going to ask if the current user is authenticated, but only in the situation where this user is a host. Now, what that means is that we need to wait until this get room details function has run before we call this method. So inside of this dot then is actually where I'm going to call this. So after we set the state, then what I'm going to do is call this dot authenticate, this dot authenticate Spotify, but I'm only going to call this if the user is the host. So we'll say if this dot state dot is host, then we can call this right here. Sweet. Okay, so that is what we'll do. Then inside of Authenticate Spotify, we will send the request. So inside of here, I'm just going to say fetch, and we're going to fetch the /Spotify /is hyphen authenticated. If I can spell this correctly, this is a large word. Okay, fetch Spotify is authenticated. Now we will say dot then, and we will take our response like that, and we will simply return response.json. Now we know that we're never going to have an invalid response because all we're ever doing is just returning true or false. Then we'll add another dot then, and we'll say then data, and then we will do something with this data. So what are we going to do with the data? Well, we're going to start by setting the state of whatever was returned to us, so whether the user is authenticated or not. So we're going to say this dot set state, and inside of here, we're going to say, I guess, what do we even call this? Spotify authenticated, and then I guess this is going to be colon data dot status. Because remember, status is what we returned as the key that held either true or false for whether the user was authenticated. Now, after this is where it gets interesting. If the user is not authenticated, we need to authenticate them. So we're going to say if not data.status. So then inside of here, what we'll do is we'll say fetch, and we will fetch the URL that we're going to use to authenticate. So /Spotify /get -auth -URL. Then we will say dot then, and we will take the response and simply return the response.json like that. Then we will say dot then again, and we'll say dot then, and data is equal to, and we're going to do something interesting inside of here. So let me pause for 1 second. So now at this point, data is going to be equal to, data.url is going to be equal to the URL that we need to use to authenticate. So pretty much what happens is, let's go to views again. If we have a look at Spotify callback, or sorry, not Spotify callback, but auth URL, we see that we just return the URL, right? So the key URL gives us the URL, and the URL will be prepared by this statement right here. So we will visit that URL, and then when we visit that URL, we'll have the user authenticate their Spotify account. So that's like what we're going to do inside of here. So to do that, we need to say window.location.replace, and this is another way to do a redirect that is not involved in React. Like this is native to JavaScript. So we'll say window.location.replace, and inside of brackets, we're going to say data.url. So what this will do is redirect us to this Spotify authorization page. Then from here, after the user authorizes us, it will redirect us to the Spotify callback. So then the Spotify callback will save the token and redirect us to the front end. And then the front end will redirect us back to the room page. So that is kind of what's going on here. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's what this will do. Now, there's one thing that we need to do. We need to bind this method to this keyword. So let's just quickly do that. We'll say this dot, I guess, what is it? What do we even call this? Authenticate Spotify is equal to this dot authenticate Spotify, and then dot bind to this keyword. Okay, so now that that is bound to the this keyword, this should work. Okay, so I'm jumping in here at kind of a random point. I apologize for the strange transition, but I had messed a few things up, and anyways, I just have to come back here. So the last thing we need to do, because I just realized we forgot to do this before we actually test this application, is we need to set the redirect URI, otherwise we're going to run into an issue. So let's set the redirect URI, and just as a reminder, we should set this to /Spotify/redirect, because that's where we want to go after we authenticate or authorize our application. So let's go to the credentials and let's set this to HTTP : and then 127.0.0.1/Spotify/redirect. All right. So now what will happen is after we hit the Spotify authorization page, we'll redirect to /redirect, which as a refresher is this right here, the Spotify callback. And then this will redirect us to the home page and all should be good. So let's try this now, but actually this reminds me I have this page open. We need to go to our Spotify dashboard, so our developer dashboard. We need to go to edit settings on our project and we need to authorize this redirect URL. So we just need to add the same thing we just wrote in redirect URIs inside of the settings of our app. So let's go to settings. Let's go to redirect HTTP 127.0.0.1. Sorry, this is :8000. My bad. We'll have to add that to the other one. And then /Spotify/redirect. And then we'll press add. So that should be good. Now let's just go back here and let's add the :8000 because I forgot that. So :8000. Let's save that there. And now we can try to run this. So again, I apologize that this is a lot before we run anything, but this is really what we need to do before we could even test this. So now I'm going to go to 127 and okay, we're now inside the room page. Now I'm just going to clear my cache here and reset this so that we can test this from the beginning. Let's go to create room. Let's press create room and then boom, we get inside of the room. But for some reason, it doesn't ask us to authorize with Spotify. And okay, that would be because we're already getting true because I had messed with this previously. Anyways, to test this out again, I'm just going to go to an incognito window and we'll go now into the app. I'm going to go create a room and ready. Let's press create a room and let's pray that this works. Okay, boom, there we go. It redirects us to the Spotify page here. Not the cleanest redirect in the world, but it did bring us there. And now I'm just gonna sign into my Spotify account. I'm gonna skip over this because obviously I don't want you guys to see my credentials, and then we will continue. Okay, there we go. So I just signed in, I pressed authorize, and then it brought me back to this page. Now, I did actually just print something out so we could see, but let's go to console. We can see that this true here is telling us that we are indeed authorized. All right, guys, so with that, I'm going to leave the video here. In the next video, we'll do more with this Spotify API. We'll actually set up a nice interface so we can view the current song, fast forward, play, pause, all of that. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in another YouTube video.